You've got it tuned into the Zelos podcast. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder, and this week I've got another podcast host coming on as my guest, Joel Smith from Just Fly Sports podcast. We've had him on before, but I thought it would be nice to catch up with Joel. It's been a while since we chatted, so before we get underway, remember, Setanta College is a place you can go for a Master's of Science in 4 different fields of strength and conditioning, exercise psychology, and sports injuries. So setantacollege.com, if you are interested in signing up, tuition can be 10% off if you enter the code RS10, RS10. That's setantacollege.com. Be sure to click the subscribe button for this podcast, and here we go.
Well, Joel, it's so great to have you back on. It's been a while. I know you were in the Bay Area for a while, but then you've settled in the Midwest, and I take it things are going well there?
Yeah, a lot busier than when I arrived here. But it's like your kids start to grow up, and then you have more kids, and it's I used to always wonder when people said they were busy or they didn't have time. I always used to wonder what that meant. I was like, well, "Are you kidding me?" Like I got and that's when I was in my 20s, and now I'm like, "Oh, I understand now." But life is good. I love it. It's spring here now. It finally is not cold. Track practice was 80 degrees yesterday, and yeah, all the trees, the buds are blooming. It's awesome. So I can't
Oh,
complain.
that's great. Okay, so you collect children now. Are they your own, or you just get them off the
Oh,
street? How's this working?
well, I mean, I have my own 3 kids, but I also try to stay active coaching. Well, this is actually the first season I haven't coached youth soccer because I'm coaching track this spring. But I find Michael Zwiefel, who is a youth sports and now football coach, had said every coach should work with both children and then pro athletes, or at least as far on the ends of the spectrum as you can get, just to see that from the beginning of the journey to the end. So I really enjoy coaching children, or working. I shouldn't say coaching them. It's more like facilitating play. I enjoy that in pretty much any medium that it exists. So it's been a lot of fun with both my own kids, and then yeah, it is collecting kids. And when you coach youth soccer, it is kind of like it's half facilitating and half collecting the kids that wander off, and you're like, no, we're over here. And it's fun. It's always fun.
Yeah, and so for your perspective, being an expert in speed, sprinting, and of course just human mechanics, what is it like for you? I know how it's like for me, but what is it like for you to watch the development of children as they begin to master the art of movement?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a big like the answers I found in nature person, and always giving the benefit of the doubt to how the individual solves like the problem. And in this case, the problem is, how do I get from point A to point B as fast as possible? I also, and not to get off on a tangent too, but I'm just starting to get into this, the idea, the philosophy that's like nature good, technology bad, like the AI and all that. And I don't think it's that clear cut. So I also try to check my biases there. But I do look at children playing as the same thing basically as going for a walk in the woods and looking at, a flower or a beetle crawling and those things, and observing this thing that's so complex, and so much of it we still don't understand. And kind of having that sense of wonder, because and also in working with children, you realize how it's not just children that having a sense of wonder is important. Even in high school coaching, there's application where we have a lot of times we look at coaching as I guess you could say didactic, or the typical, I have knowledge, I will give you knowledge, you will act on knowledge. But children operate off of not really that. It's a sense of wonder and imagination. And I think that does ring true later on. I'm kind of getting off on a tangent here, but what I'm trying to say is watching children move teaches you so much, because it's like on one level, it's so often it is perfect. The way they are moving and learning to move is perfection. But then humans, as opposed to like animals, like you watch squirrels or robins in your backyard, we have the ability to take on stress, unlike animals, where animals just shake it off. And we have, along with kind of that, like, it's like we almost pay for that intellectual development of the outer brain. Like we have all these good things that come from it, but it also impacts our movement in kind of a gnarly way sometimes, and not a good way. And so it's almost like in watching children, and especially not just speed, but as they play sport and soccer, it's like, well, the fast kids on the field part of it is their locomotion, but part of it is also they don't have the layers of fear and trepidation. Is that a good word? I like that the other children do, where the other children have more perceptual barriers that keep them from instantly reacting to the environment around them. Basically,
Is that something you can coach? I mean, is that something that you look at and you're like, okay, how can I peel back these layers of trepidation, fear, anxiety, however you would like to term it, to get to the free, fearless athlete?
Yeah, I mean, to me, that is something that has been so on my radar since with two things. One is the coaching the kids, but also Chris Korfist, who's a really well-known high school sprints coach and active in a lot of other like sports performance and consultation. He talks about even speed, linear speed is cutting through layers of fear. And he uses the example of like vision, like kids with really like high prescription glasses, very poor vision are, well, it is funny because you would watch the Paralympics, right? And there's the visual, the blind athletes and the guides. And that's like so awesome to watch. I'm like, and the long jump, the visually impaired long jump, like how much guts does it take to do that? It's so crazy. But Chris will say he doesn't see a lot of really fast athletes who have a lot of like visual issues. And I think there's something, the link is the sense of safety. Because it's like, well, how fast can I turn my wheels if I don't feel safe in my environment? And the vision not being the only thing. There's a lot of things. But what I find is, and the answer of if it's trainable, I think yes, but it's not all in the way that I believe we think. I think vision is one thing we can more easily train because there's more there's more concrete pieces to that. One thing Chris does that and this is something I've just started playing around with, he has said he has gotten a 10% basically increase in speed he's got like these dribbling glasses, like basketball dribbling, where it blocks out the bottom. So you like can't see the ground. So it does something with the way you anticipate the ground and things like that. But where I've gone to it is I look at it a little bit more. This really expands the bubble, but what did you come into this world with fear and anxiety from your parents, for example? Because I think that I actually see this in at least what my older daughter she is a more sensitive child. She's not aggressive and she treats the game that way too. And so her mission in soccer is kind of to hang back and be the last line of defense and let all the other kids get in there, but that fits in with her feedback loops. Her feedback loops are not fast either. Just the way her body, her reaction times, if that makes sense. And you wonder too, if that is part of it, because I cannot react as fast to other players and I don't have a sense of safety being in that pack. Maybe I'll just hang back a little bit more and take it in. And I actually see a little bit of that in my son as well. And I think that's like psychological, you could say inheritance from parents, the way your mind works versus someone who's like aggressive, let's get in there, I'll wrestle with like that kind of no fear human like contact. And I do think there is like roughhousing stuff, like Rafe Kelly, I just had him on my podcast, talks about like roughhousing, and you're through embodiment teaching people like what's okay, like what's for level of aggression, what's not okay, how do you deal with it if someone is in your space personally. And so I do think there's things there, but I think a lot of that is stuff that's windows are when you're a child, because as soon as you get older, it's a lot harder to change some of those hard wirings.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and just experiential for myself, like my daughter is our oldest child, and being the first time parents, you don't coddle, but you're a little bit more concerned about their safety. They're the ones that break the ice for their siblings down the road. So our second child, our son, we were a lot more roughhousing with him, and he latched onto that. And I think that in terms of sports, like on the soccer pitch, my daughter would be one that would kind of hold back, where my son was just the fireball screaming around the pitch as fast as he could. And my daughter, she had to learn to be aggressive, of being in the net, and then eventually playing high school football. Now she hits chicks with sticks, as that's what I kind of, she's in lacrosse, and she loves to go head to head, but it was something that did not necessarily come relatively, I won't say naturally, but as as readily available. It didn't seem like that was as readily available as it was for my son, who's off chasing
Mhm.
monster waves these days. They both have their levels of aggression, pushing through fears and anxieties. But I think one, our older child, had a little bit more of an uphill battle with it because of the way which we parented. So that's very interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think even like just like free play and wrestling. Like my son is 5, and he's more of a strategist on the field, and he isn't quite that aggressive. Hey, I'm going to get in. And with kids soccer, it's just like a bunch of it's like a bunch of bees on a ball. Like it's not like
Yeah.
there's not
Scrum ball.
passing and play. Yeah, and I think on some level he strategizes and thinks to himself, what good is it going to be if I get in there? But there is also I think if he had older brothers, like Jeremy Frisch, who's big into like play and youth development, talks about this. It's almost like for boys, I think especially being around other boys and you're constantly wrestling and roughhousing. I think that does filter into or can filter into the way you also process sport and the like you said, the roughhousing and layers of aggression. So yeah, I think there's a lot. And the one thing I'll just say is animals. Like it's so interesting watching. I saw a video the other day of like a deer, and I go running in this trail where I see deer a lot. I just find it interesting to observe them. But there was a video where a deer somehow jumped someone's like gardening fence or something like that, and it was trapped inside. And it literally was just running and like blasting its head into the fence to escape. No, there was absolutely zero like fear of personal damage. And it's like, and then it finally found its way out after like smashing into the fence crazily like 8 times. But I just think it's interesting to contrast. Now, I would not advocate humans doing that, but it's just interesting to look at how powerful and how attuned to the environment and how like linked in animals are, and just like the ability to just do that and disregard, but then be explosive and find your way. I just find it very fascinating compared to we're almost the other extreme. We're almost too safe in some senses. And then there's a lot of language like if someone's a great athlete, oh, they're an animal, or if they're just repeat ability, oh, they're a dog, they can just keep going, or like, and then cats are like fast agile. So it is interesting to draw those parallels and see how we're different sometimes in that environmental adaptation.
I imagine. So, speaking of adaptation, you have adapted your coaching skills from working with high caliber adult athletes to working with youth sports, youth athleticism. I'm curious the channels that go back and forth. For instance, what do you take from your ability to coach the youth that you found carries over well to dealing with the adults, and vice versa? What is it that you're doing with the adults that you start using those type of tools with the kids? And do you find any kind of thing going back and forth there?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something that I think the answer to that question, I don't have all the answers. I can just say kind of where I've started to go with it. But I think we live in an interesting, very linear trend in training. It's like, okay, you're a kid and you play, and as soon as and unfortunately, this is way too early these days. As soon as you're, 6, 7, or 8, we got the score on the scoreboard. We're going to teach you the tactics, and it's very rudimentary. It becomes rudimentary and prescriptive, and the free play piece gets lost very quickly. I enjoyed watching. That's right. I don't watch TV much these days, but I was at my in-laws, and the Pro Bowl for NFL is not like the Pro Bowl anymore. It's just a bunch of games. And it
Right.
was just so much fun watching the dodgeball part because you're seeing these pro football players, grown men playing dodgeball. But I wanted to get a snapshot, just the smile on their face, because you could see the 6-year-old or the 8-year-old or the 10-year-old in that individual and how much fun it was. And I mean, and then they'd go play like, 7-on-7 or flag or whatever. It's still having fun, but it wasn't quite the same. Like, and I think maybe for some of them it was, but like just remembering that core joy of why we started this and why we move and why we play in the first place. And so, if anything, with coaching the kids and setting that up, and also just kind of just really sports skill is such and motor learning is such an important piece on my radar and has been constantly growing on me. All those things, like when I do a high school track practice, so I can give you examples of how I used to coach like high jump, let's say 15 years ago versus now, is it was a lot more back then. It was like, okay, I have the practice written out. We're going to take this many jumps. Usually you just do like all the jumps in a serial manner. So it's like, okay, we have 5-step high jumps today, which is like a short approach. Usually you go off 8 or 10 steps. So we're going to do 5-step high jumps, and we're going to do 10 of those. And before we do 10 of those, we're going to do 5 scissor jumps. And before we do those, we're going to do 5 standing like back over jumps. And in many ways, that is fine. Like to have a serial practice laid out. That's how most coaches or skill developers will lay out their practice. And sometimes I may have a practice like that. There's nothing wrong with that practice inherently. But where I've gone is looking in, instead of just a purely linear, going into the nonlinear, which is more like waves of work. And so for something that I think everybody's familiar with, like sprinting, instead of saying, hey, you're going to do 6 30-meter sprints as fast as you can, or 4 40s as fast as you can, I might say, all right, here's 6 30-meter dashes. Sprint 1 is easy or smooth. Sprint 2, get faster. Sprint 3, go hard. And then we're going to repeat that cycle. Sprint 4 is smooth. Sprint 5, go faster. Sprint 6, go hard. And that just works. It just feels better to do that, because inevitably, if you just do them all as fast as you can, a lot of strain energy starts coming out, a lot more forebrain, like the thing that makes us human, but with movement not good sometimes, comes out. And so I find, like with high jump these days, like I had an athlete who I don't get to work with a lot. This will be an example. She does soccer, she does other events, so I don't get her for practice that often. So we kind of have to work off what we do in the meets, but she's very instinctual. And I think this is why she's a good example. Team sport athletes who do track tend to be very instinctive. They tend to operate better when you can make track like a game for them or allow them a lot more just like feeling, like they get to feel it out more. Where someone who doesn't do many team sports and just did track and they're used to didactic and they're used to telling me what to do, it might be a little different story, although I do try to get them to be a little more adaptive in how they learn. But for her, we were trying to work on how she ran the curve, because she tends to take too long of steps up to the bar. And you want to have kind of shorter, more rhythmic steps to be able to run a curve before you jump. And so instead of being like, hey, we're going to just do short rhythmic steps the whole time, what I said was, all right, we're going to do waves of 3. Effort 1 is very long steps. So I had a cone where the steps would all be very long. Effort 2, they're medium, so get faster. And effort 3, they're the fastest steps. And I would do that process for each bar. And I said, you tell me what feels the best. I'm making this centered around you. I'm not going to tell you. This is a collaboration. And so as we went through, she was able to start instinctively picking up what step pattern was the best for her. And so a lot of it's just like, yeah, that athlete centered. And we'll also too, I will say too, like sometimes we tend to warm up with play. Like we warm up with, I'll bring pool noodles to practice. Sometimes you chase the person, try to hit them, like something that brings that kid-like joy. And then we get into a practice, and sometimes it's more serial, sometimes it's more wave. It just depends a little bit on who you are and where you are in the process. But those are some ways that I've taken, just like an athlete, watching how athletes learn from an emergent perspective, and then kind of putting that into something that has been a little more formal historically, which is a track practice.
Well, I'm glad you bring up the importance of play, because it seems that just, I would say culturally, I won't say naturally, but as a culture, we have a tendency to try to grow up as quickly as possible and to shun any type of play beyond a certain age, and it becomes much more linear in the form of our development, not undulating, not I would say disconnected, not chaotic, but just a whole bunch of almost disconnected forms of play that bring about a huge, wonderful foundation of movement. And even now we have LTAD, long-term athletic development. And I think as we saw the origination in other countries like Canada, Korea, Eastern European nations that really started to develop this long-term athletic plan, it was very, very linear. From an early age, we're going to extract them from their families, put them in these academies, and we are going to get them to be adults and train like adults, even though physically and psychologically, mentally and emotionally, they haven't developed those skills yet. And now it seems like, okay, where the pendulum is starting to swing a little bit back in the other direction, where we're starting to incorporate the importance of play back into training, to the point that now, like you say, the Pro Bowl, we have dodgeball. And I think that we, as professionals, we sometimes do not see the outcome that we are not necessarily looking for, meaning like what you say about the players. They were smiling, they're connecting back to their childhood, they're having a great time. And with that, I think there's such importance to that, and that we should look at what is the emotional response of an athlete. If it is just somewhat flat, driven, yes, but not necessarily smiling. There's something to be said for, hey, you know what? We're going to do something completely different now, and we're going to incorporate pool noodles or something like that. I think that is. Do you see that? I guess outside of your own local realm, do you see that with the research that you're looking up? Because you're always hunting down a whole great information and people that are out there, leaders in the field. Is gameplay coming back to a higher degree?
I hope so. And well, it's interesting because there's different areas. And like you said, like with the pro football players and just the joy that they had. I do find it interesting because like you look at all the branches of movement and fitness and all these things. And one of the things I've been trying to dig into and understand is one of a gym that I train athletes out of is fundamentally a CrossFit gym. Like that's kind of their home base is like CrossFit, discipline, hard work, getting the work done, waking up early and all those things, which I think those are very positive value systems. But I think what I've always kind of struggled, or I always thought it was interesting. I was like, what if this CrossFit class or this high intensity fitness class or whatever, like what if they warmed up with 10 minutes of play? Wouldn't they love that? And I just always found a resistance to that idea. It's almost as if, I don't know. It's interesting. I think it's something where we can get in the mindset almost of like play as kids stuff. Like we're adults now, and this is what we need to do. But the interesting, I mean, to me, for me, it's almost like trying to be like. I think for the whole thing to move forward, you can't say like one thing is the ultimate and the other thing is not. Oh, well, people beat themselves up too much in fitness, and they just, we just need to play. It's like, well, each piece of fitness carries and gives its own emotional benefit. Like lactate is good for the brain. Like doing things in CrossFit or a HIIT class gives people a lactate, brain lactate stimulation. And there's a certain good feeling that comes with that. I think that the way forward to me is it's almost like it's the balance, right? It's okay. Maybe you've done too much HIIT and lactate, and you have to come up and you were show up 30 minutes early, warm up every day, and maybe that's a little too much. Maybe we need to spend some more time playing or doing a movement practice or playing tennis or pickleball or something. And so I think it's to me. I think that like the way forward in fitness in some sense is understand the emotion that goes behind the thing you're doing, the practice you're doing. And I think some people just don't realize what they're missing by not having a playful practice. I think there's just an imbalance of not playful and just have, because I know you're in surfing, like, and that's the play piece. And I think people don't understand how important that is mentally and emotionally, that it's not like if you just live in the gym and you don't do anything outside the gym, you're actually disconnecting from a fundamental human I think that makes us human. So I think there's that on the adult side, but then on the children's side, yeah, like I think we've cut play and nature exposure out of the ecosystem of childhood development and replaced it with more lessons, more tutoring, which I get school's important, but like we've imbalanced everything to test scores and getting college scholarships and meeting that criteria that we've cut out, and sports and getting on the travel team and the AAU that we've cut out, free play, we've cut out nature exposure, just being outside and being bored, or the kids in the neighborhood just doing whatever. Like, and so I think there's a fundamental imbalance there, that if that's the first place it needs to go in my opinion. I do think facilitating it is great in the coaching situation and trying to infuse that as we can. But it's almost like making up for something that's gone wrong in the ecosystem, if that makes sense.
No, it makes tremendous sense. You bring up some really great points. connecting back with nature, the importance of experiencing boredom, uh,
Yes.
and really just from a coach's perspective, seeing what the outcome is for every skill drill or activity that you do, every exercise, and you're going to need certain things in endorphin releases, lactate experience for the brain, but you also need an emotional response, a positive emotional response. Whether it's play pickleball, there's no question in my mind that the reason why that is the fastest growing sport is because it's low level entry and it's fun, and
Yeah.
people smile, and they have to do it with others, so there's community, a sense of that. And it's not necessarily, it's easy to organize. It's no wonder. And I think that it's funny that you're thinking back to dodgeball and the Pro Bowl. We have a class that we've been teaching for years. We named it the bridge class because it bridges the gap between those that are very deconditioned or released from medical care, and they need to start doing something on a regular basis. So we call it the bridge class. It's not age related or specific, but as it turns out, we've got a lot of mature adults in this class. And one of the things we do on a regular basis is play dodgeball at the end of
That's
the
awesome.
workout. And oh my gosh, you want to talk about a change in behavior and a happiness. And then they love it. They're just like little kids. Honestly, the full circle of life comes around, and here are these 75, 77-year-olds going, oh, can we play dodgeball today? Can we? And it's just like, oh, yes, yes. Okay. You've earned it. You've done a great job today. Here's your dessert. So, okay. So let's change the channel here a little bit. I want to talk more about what you've been doing in terms of your own website. You've got some courses that are fantastic that you've developed. Are you on? I know you've got the young kids, so I don't expect you to be on any type of lecture series or lecture touring kind of. But what have you been up to lately aside from the coaching?
Oh yeah. Yeah. So yeah, the coaching has been more, yeah, with the kids in the high school. But then outside of that, it's been mostly, yeah, kind of developing, I guess you could say, a course curriculum. I have my main course, which is Elastic Essentials, came out in late 2021, and that was based off of, I mean, I think these ideas have all been in the collective. So this by itself, I don't think was anything truly revolutionary, but just the idea that we view for athletic performance, it's always been associated, at least for probably the past 30, 40 years, with, all right, get your squat up, get your deadlift up, get your bench up, maximal strength in the gym. And the ability to output force is certainly a part of it, but it's only one of the cogs in the wheel. And just there's such an imbalance in how we view those cogs. It's like you have a giant cog of maximal strength, and then maybe little teeny tiny cogs around it of any sort of function and elasticity and how the system operates. And so a lot of that course was actually going to a movement first perspective, a body weight first before intensification. I know we've talked about that with like getting more out of single leg work, and before you just blast, hey, how heavy a dumbbell can we use for this? Like movement quality, and understanding that in light of plyometrics and locomotion. And then, of course, my view on strength training and where that fits into the puzzle. And then the second course was more, where the first course was a little bit more on like elasticity, body weight movement, infusing strength with that. Then the second course was on acceleration development. So in a way, you could just say something that's more fundamentally powerful. And then there was a lot of I talked about the skill piece with track, and a lot of it, the skill and motor learning also goes into that, but just because I think that in sports performance, it's just so prescriptive. We almost choke out like motor learning. What I've found, if anything, through my podcast, as soon as it's skill development and motor learning, it's almost like an instant 30% hit in views. Because I don't know why people don't want to go there, because I mean, to me, it's foundational. Like, it's teaching people things. And it's also, the more you learn about how we learn, and that nonlinear, as I mentioned, and everything that goes into that and how the athlete receives it, that actually can improve your prescriptive programming, because you saw how the athlete learned, and now you can go back as you write the prescriptions, and you can write those around the learning process. So it's symbiotic. And so that was that course. And then I'm coming out with a new course this summer that's a lot about, it's like what we're talking about. It's infusing a lot of the alive pieces, the creative and the complex pieces that, as I see it, are a little bit more it's built on a foundation of the pros and cons of the different modalities of, all right, you have eccentric, isometric, concentric, plyometric. You could say electrostimulation, those kind of things. What is the good of each of those? Where's the drawbacks? Because at some point, if you're an athlete and you're in your body weight and in sport and high velocity, there will be drawbacks. How do we take these and make art out of it? I've been like, a lot of people have been getting into like Rick Rubin and the creative need, and so I've been reading his book. It's awesome. So I'm just thinking about how do we define these pieces in light of athleticism, and now we infuse it with aliveness. And by aliveness, I mean the strategic gamification and exploration of fundamental training means plyometrics, and then how does that funnel into the output? You could do that with strength. And then how do we take this and make complexes out of that? And when is there the need for complexes? And when are they actually snuck in fundamentally? Like if you run the 400-meter dash, that actually is a complex because the first 50 meters is explosive and easy. The middle, your body is cycling motor units and trying to stay on rhythm. And then the end, it's like the finisher because you now have lactate in the system. Some muscles have dropped out and you now have to figure out how to be explosive and finish the race with that lactate in the system. So sometimes back to nature, sometimes these things are just found fundamentally in very basic things. And we sometimes can get a lot out of those basic things before we have to make the jump. So that's what that one's. So it's going to be kind of like a triad, and I'm trying to figure out how to just build. It's been the process of mining my own mind and trying to, instead of just kind of be like, blah, here's a bunch of things, trying to have a little bit more of a formulaic approach to understanding some of the things we just maybe either take for granted or don't consider in the process of building an athlete.
So in the regards to like the 400 meter you just spoke of, there's 3 segments or portions. You break those up and you create drills or activities, or how does that work? How do you break up the complexity?
Yeah. And so that's the cool thing to me, is that the complexity is like with nature, like trying to understand it. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, like even looking at a leaf and like, wow, this is just unbelievably intricate and beautiful. And like we might assign a complex, like a training complex, like, okay, you're going to do these squats and then right after you're going to do box jumps or something like that. Or you could even say, all right, we're going to complex 200-meter sprints that are long with 20-meter sprints that are short. That is another complex. But if I just go play, I'll just say even outside the 400, it might be easier to bring it into like basketball or soccer. Soccer is a complex because you might have to run a lot up and down the field and the heart rate spikes. And then you get to rest. And then maybe you have a short little quick sprint here. And then you have a long burst again. And so in itself, soccer is a nonlinear, giant, complex set, which is so beautiful. And I think there's a reason that as long as it's not overwhelming, like if you just played 20 minutes of pickup soccer and then you did a sprint timed as fast as you could, you would blaze that sprint. Now, the whole game's a different story, but same thing with pickup basketball. If I go play pickup basketball with my buddies and I play a game for 15, 20 minutes, if I'm in good shape, maybe 30 or 40, I can usually dunk and jump better after that than anything else. And it's the same thing. It's social, emotional, and it's a non-linear complex because, like I said, there might be a lot of running, then there's some explosive jumps, and then it kind of goes back. So back to the 400 or the 300, what my point was, we talk about, is complex training good? Is complex training bad? Like there's people who are like, well, French contrast isn't that good. Or to me, it's all the principles and it's all how you lay it out. And to me, like I like starting with the simplest things. So to me, simple is if athletes just go and they run like 3 300s or 3 400s and they're all pretty fast. And I would say I always start with the shorter end. So if I'm talking track athletes, maybe we're starting with 3 250s or something that's a little easier. But in each longer sprint, you get a distinctive and unfolding complex because as you take on fatigue, the body must adapt to that fatigue and process it differently. So you have this built-in variability. And I hope not to make it too complicated, but you could also, some coaches will take those long sprints and then have a broken version. So maybe it's a 300, but we're going to do a 200 fast and then rest a minute and then run the last 100. I guess what I'm trying to say is complex training and variability and nonlinear is a fundamental human concept, and it makes training better. And if we can get that as naturally as possible early and recognize it, that's the first like layer, and maybe we don't even have to go past that. And then when we hit a plateau, then maybe we say, okay, like that basketball game where you were getting, all this, natural variability, maybe we can take that up a level by saying, all right, maybe if we wanted to be explosive, let's play basketball for 5-minute bursts, and then we're going to go do 3 dunks, and someone's going to try to block your dunk. And then we'll go back and play for 5 more minutes, and then do another explosive outcome type goal. Maybe it's a depth jump to a dunk, and then someone's going to try to block. Like if you really wanted to take the nonlinear into something explosive. So I hope that makes sense. Is what I'm trying to say is so much of what we would call complex training is built in the system in many cases. And the goal is to not, if we're talking about long-term development, we don't want to necessarily accelerate things faster than they need to. We need to let nature do its thing and grow as nature does. And then once there's a stall out, we can take things that are already happening, and now we can start to craft them a little bit and take our intellectual brains and try to make them a little more, I guess a little more linear and planned out. But we don't want to lose that fundamental core of athleticism either, which is that just like play and feeling of wonder. It's something like outside yourself that's not just a set of directions, if that makes sense.
No, it makes sense. It gets my head spinning a little bit in a nice way too, because infusing play. Everything you said was really. I mean, if we just encourage more play, we're going to have tremendous amounts of complex actions. We're going to, whether it's on a soccer pitch or a basketball court or playing tag or whatever it's going to be. But can we blend them together with a conditioning routine in the same moment, which would be okay, we're going to be doing these lifts here, and then we're going to play a game of tag, and then we're going to come back, we're going to do these plyos, and then we're going to go over to the basketball court for a little one-on-one, and just kind of infusing that. I think that could be a fun kind of research project for anybody that would be out there, right? That I would love to see that. I know that there are some NFL performance directors or strength coaches who actually have pre-game lifts. And the same with some NBA performance directors that I know. They will actually do sub-maximal. Of course, they're not trying to go for any major RMs or anything, but they will get some of the more complex loading patterns in the gym prior to the game, and the players really respond well. It's like, okay, I've activated my body, and now I'm going back on the court. It's a little different than what we're talking about, but at the same time, infusing those back and forth, and not just being strictly, I'm going to be doing these lifts on match day -1, match day -2, and then I'm just going to do some easy drills on game day. It just kind of, I love how the thought process is constantly evolving and trying to find new ways. And going back to nature, like you say, is fantastic. Now, we've got the Olympics coming up in just a matter of a couple of months here. And I know that you, being the high jumper and track star that you've been in the past and coach and all that, you must be gearing up for the Olympics. Is this one of those drooling kind of moments that you're gonna record everything on triple cast or whatever?
It is funny. Like I mentioned, my TV, the Olympics is the one time in every 4 years that makes me wish that I had more active like TV, like subscriptions to cable. I mean, I just have like Disney Plus for my kids and just like, I don't know, Roku, Hulu. Like I tend to, if I watch stuff, it's often with the kids or family. And then outside of that, if I have a special interest, it's YouTube. So it's making me, I'll probably have to get some sort of cable access. And you know what's funny, Rocky, is I love track, but I may end up watching swimming more just because that's where like most of the Olympic athletes that I've worked with, the majority have come from. So it's like, and I went into swimming knowing almost nothing about swimming, as well as being a really bad swimmer. And then just watching Olympians go through the Olympic training cycles and seeing all that and starting to learn more about everything. I will probably end up watching that the most, even though right now I'm actually not working with any swimmers, which is fine, but it's just a sport that really grew on me. And there's so many, like, it's a sport that the upwards curve of improvement is actually compared to track, which there's still people who are, threatening world records in track, but, like Sidney McLaughlin, 400 hurdles and those things. But the tracks have also gotten faster too. I think there's something about that. But I tell you, man, swimming is still on this upward curve that is just crazy. And even after the super suit era, you're starting to see And I think swimming coaching is starting to improve. It used to be just yardage, straight yardage, and there's a lot more cutting edge stuff in swim training, and you're just seeing a lot of these records go down. And so there's a lot of swimming that I'll definitely be checking out. I think breakdancing's in there. I definitely have to watch that. Rock climbing, there's speed climbing. There's actually like speed climbers, Olympic speed climbers at the rock climbing gym I was at this winter. It's really cool to watch. So I'll definitely be checking that out. But yeah, it's a great celebration of athleticism and ability, and I'll do my best to catch up with it. So I'm definitely looking forward to it.
All right, I'm recommending you don't get a subscription. In 2010, when the Winter Olympics were happening, my wife and I decided, you know what, we should get cable just for the Olympics, and we've had it ever since. We just haven't let it go. It just sucked us right in. We don't need it. It doesn't do anything important in our lives, but dang it. Yeah, once you're in, it's kind of like the mafia. They never let you go. So maybe just online you can get them. But it's interesting because you've got the body of a swimmer in many ways. Maybe your shoulders could be slight, but you got the length. You got the long arm reach. I'm surprised you're not a swimmer.
It is, I thought people, when I was working with swim at Cal as a strength coach, if the recruits came in and they saw me and the coach said, oh yeah, he was an Olympic, 200-meter swimmer, they probably would have believed it because my arms, I'm 6'1" with a 6'6" reach, and, which is good for basketball too, but my legs are kind of short, which is good for butterfly. And I tell you, actually, I finally learned how to do butterfly at Cal because the volunteer assistants taught me. And now I love getting in the pool and feeling that rhythm because I never could do it when I was growing. But I think the thing that kills me is I think I have a very high bone density. I'm way heavier than people would think I am if I told them. And I just sink. I cannot float. And I know I could. I'm not saying limiting because I know there's really good coaches who teach these things like floating pieces and sensory pieces. I think part of it as well, and I've heard this is like if you have, this is a whole nother rabbit trail, but if you're like a good single leg jumper and you're really reactive, there's something to that and your legs sinking or feet sinking. And I don't know what it is, to be honest, but it's just interesting pieces with buoyancy. It's funny watching my son, he gets on top of the water and floats. And I'm like, you look kind of like me, Ian, but man, you really can get on top of the water in a way I never could. So in another life, maybe I do love swimming though. It's something that I wish I would have, at least maybe some sprint swimming or been a little better at, but it's fun learning the strokes and just messing around with buoyancy. So I love it. I look like one, but there's just some disconnects there that are very
strange. Yeah. You and me both. We're great underwater swimmers. That's why I have to put a surfboard between me and the water. It's just, otherwise I'm down to the bottom. Yeah. I could just walk on the surface. That's it. Joel, this has been fantastic. I know you've got to blaze a trail right now, and I really appreciate the time you gave me. But hey, for the listening audience, Just Fly Sports podcast, you got to check it out. I'm sure you're already listening to it because he's got a great following there. But if people want to learn more about your coaching and the courses, the one that's coming out this summer, give us a little rundown of how they can find out more.
Just head to justflysports.com, and it's not good for search engine optimization because there's a dash between just and fly and sports. But justflysports.com with dashes, and that's where all like the courses, links to podcasts, and then Instagram with Just Fly Sports with no dashes. So that's where you can find me.
Right on. Well, this has been great. I love connecting with you. Always get so much out of our conversations. I mean, you're just a breath of knowledge. And I wish you well, and I can't wait for our time to connect again.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rocky.
And that's it for this episode of the Zelos podcast. I want to thank Joel for coming on, and be sure to check out his podcast if you haven't already. He's got a great following and a great lineup of guests over there at Just Fly Sports. Meanwhile, check out his website. The link will be in the description below the podcast for the courses that he's teaching and all the information that he's willing to share. Until next week, remember, Setanta College is where you want to go for your master's of science in a whole bunch of different fields to choose from. SetantaCollege.com. Hit RS10 of the coupon code for 10% off your tuition. We'll see you next week.